Thank you. What a pleasure to be here. What a great topic, the end of school. Yay. I'm an evolutionary psychologist, and what that means is that I'm interested in human nature. I'm interested in how that nature came about by biological evolution, by natural selection. I'm particularly interested in the nature of human children, and most particularly in that aspect, those aspects of children's nature that lead them to become educated. So the big idea that I'm here to talk about is this: that children are biologically designed to educate themselves. They do it joyfully through play, questioning, and exploration. We don't need to educate children. All we need to do is to provide the conditions that would allow them to educate themselves. The basic instincts of childhood, their playfulness, their curiosity, their willfulness, their sociability, have been honed by natural selection to serve the function of education. But we take those abilities away when we put them in school and prevent them from educating themselves. My argument is that if we provide the conditions that children need to educate themselves, we really can do away with schools as we know them. Now, some of you might be thinking that I'm crazy. Some of you, more kindly, might be thinking that I'm a hopeless idealist. But I assure you I am neither. I'm a hard-headed realist. I've done a great deal of research on this topic. The idea that I'm talking about today is supported by a great deal of empirical observation and research, which is elaborated upon in my book, but which here I have just a few minutes to try to convince you is worth thinking about. The first way I want to think about this idea is by looking at hunter-gatherer cultures. Now, we were all hunter-gatherers until relatively recently in history from a biological point of view. Some people in certain isolated parts of the world have survived as hunter-gatherers into modern times, and anthropologists have found them and studied their cultures. A few years ago, a graduate student of mine and I conducted a survey of 10 different anthropologists who had studied 7 different hunter-gatherer cultures among them on 3 different continents. We asked them questions about how children became educated in that culture. One of our questions was, how much time do children in the culture that you observed have to play and explore on their own? And the answer that we got from every single one of these anthropologists was all the time. The children and even the teenagers are free to play and explore in age-mixed groups away from adults all day long, every day, and in the process they become educated. Another question we asked was, how do they play? What are the forms of their play? And what we found from that, from these anthropologists, was that they play at the very activities that are hardest to learn and are most important to learn for success in their culture. So they play at hunting and gathering and finding roots and digging them up. They play at building things like huts and dugout canoes and bows and arrows and musical instruments. They play at the music and dance and art of their culture. They play at those things that they have to learn to become educated. The anthropologists also told us, and I've seen it in writing many times, that they have never seen brighter, happier, more resilient, more self-reliant children than the hunter-gatherer children that they observe. So the question is, could this work in our culture? At first gloss, you might think, of course it can't. We're not hunter-gatherers. There are things that we have to learn that hunter-gatherer children don't have to learn, like reading, writing, and arithmetic. And moreover, it's not so easy for children in our culture to be exposed naturally to all the skills and knowledge that's important to the culture. So I might think that it wouldn't work, except for the fact that for many years now I've been an observer and researcher at the Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts. This school was founded in 1968, so it's now been in existence for almost half a century. It has about 150 students at any given time, age 4 on through about 18. It has about 8 staff members, adult staff members. It operates on a budget that's about half of what the local public schools cost. And it accepts essentially all students who apply. So this is not elite education. This is eminently affordable. Now, the unique things about this school are the way it is administered and the educational philosophy of the school. The school operates as a participatory democracy. All of the school rules are made by a school meeting at which each student and each staff member has one vote, and the rules are enforced at a judicial committee, by a judicial committee which is modeled after the jury system of our larger culture. At any given time, there's one little kid, one middle-sized kid, a couple of teenagers, and one staff member on the judicial committee, and if somebody, whether it's a staff member or a student, violates a rule at the school, they're brought up before the judicial committee, which makes a decision about guilt or innocence and a decision about what the punishment might be if found guilty. So that's the way the school operates. In terms of the educational philosophy, it's essentially the same as that of a hunter-gatherer band. The school offers no curriculum, no tests, no grades, no substitutes for grades. It expects children to decide themselves what they want to learn, how they want to learn, what they want to do. If you were to go through the school at any given time of day, you might see scenes such as on this slide. You would see children in the art room making various kinds of art projects. You might find somebody cooking in the kitchen. You would always find some people in the computer lab. You might find somebody in the photo lab. You might find children building with blocks in the children's playroom. Children playing music in one of the music practice rooms. Kids drawing playfully at a blackboard. Young people maybe playing a game such as chess. Outdoors, you might find people playing down by the brook, or climbing boulders, or fishing in the pond, or playing a game on the athletic field, or strumming a guitar and talking and singing. In the winter, you might find people building a snowman or skating on that pond that they fished in the fall. You might also see them playing in more traditional playground ways. The key to learning at this school is age mixing. The children are not segregated by age. The older children are naturally drawn to the little kids, and the little kids are naturally drawn to the big kids. The little children observe what the older ones can do, and they want to do that. They want to be able to read if they see older ones read. They want to be able to climb trees if they see older ones climb trees. They also learn by interacting with the older ones. In age-mixed games, the older children are constantly scaffolding the behavior of the younger ones, bringing them up to higher levels of performance. So, for example, many children at this school learn to read because they play games that involve reading with kids who know how to read. And the kids who know how to read more or less teach them to read, not because they're trying to teach them to read, but because they almost need to do so to play the game. The advantage of age mixing also goes the other way. The older children are learning to care and be nurturant, to be leaders by helping the younger ones in this setting. And they're also being continuously inspired by the creativity and the energy of the younger ones. So the age mixing is as valuable for the older kids as for the younger ones. The best evidence that this school works comes from follow-up studies for the graduates. Quite a number of years ago, I, along with a colleague, David Chanoff, conducted one such study. We found essentially all of the people who had graduated from that school. Almost all of them agreed to be in the study. And what we found was that they were doing very well out there in the world. They had no problems in higher education if they chose to go that way. And they were in a wide variety of careers. They were essentially all of them very satisfied with their lives. Many of them, and this is really interesting to me, many of them were pursuing careers that were direct extensions of passions and interests that they had developed in childhood play. So, for example, one of the graduates was a machinist and an inventor. He was somebody who loved to build things as a kid. There was another who loved boats, who was now the captain of a cruise ship. There was another who was fascinated by computers, loved computers, who had developed his own software company. There was another who loved making doll clothes, who is now a pattern maker in the high fashion industry. And I could go on with such examples. People who have time to really pursue what they like to play at could find ways of making a living at that. So on through the rest of their life, they were doing what they were really interested in doing. Since the time of my study, a couple of other studies of the school have been conducted by staff members of the school, Daniel Greenberg and Mimsy Sadovsky, and have been published as books. And they came to essentially the same conclusion as we did. The Sudbury model is replicable. More than 36 schools modeled after it exist, mostly in this country, some in other countries. One of the closest to here is the closest to here is the Tallgrass Sudbury School in Riverside, Illinois. Success at these schools, as far as I have been able to tell, doesn't seem to depend on socioeconomic class. It doesn't seem to depend on the particulars of the student's personality. Now here I want to describe the conditions that I think are common to a hunter-gatherer band in the Sudbury Valley School, and that really are the conditions that optimize children's abilities to educate themselves. So the first condition is a clear understanding that education is the child's responsibility. When children know that they're responsible for their education, they take that responsibility. When they believe, they're led to believe that somebody else is responsible for their education and all they have to do is do what they're told, then they tend to do that in the minimal way and they don't take responsibility for their education. Second condition, unlimited opportunity to play, explore, and pursue your own interests. Unlimited time, not an hour a day, not 2 hours a day, unlimited time. It takes time to try out different things. It takes time to get bored, to overcome boredom, to find your passion, and it takes time to really delve into your passion. It takes unlimited amount of time. You can't interrupt that with bells and telling people constantly what to do and expect people to really develop a passion. 3, opportunity to play with the tools of the culture, to really play with the tools of the culture. In a hunter-gatherer culture, those would be bows and arrows and knives and fire and digging sticks. In our culture, of course, the main tool is a computer. And it's not surprising that children everywhere in our culture love to play with computers. They know in their bones that this is the tool of the culture, and they need to spend a lot of time with it. So it becomes, in a sense, an extension of their own body. Access to a variety of caring adults who are helpers, not judges. How important that last part is. Helpers, not judges. The last person you want to go to help you learn something is somebody who's evaluating you. You're nervous about that person. That person is a person you go to in more of a frame of mind of trying to impress that person with how much you know, not to say, I really don't know this and I would like some help with this. So by not judging the children, the staff members are much more able to be helpers to the children than teachers in a typical school could be. Free age mixing among children and adolescents. I've already described that. That's absolutely key to the school. The school would not work if it were children all the same age, because children don't have much to learn from others who are the same age. They learn from children who are older and from children who are younger than themselves. 6, immersion in a stable, moral, democratic community. Both a hunter-gatherer band and the Sudbury Valley School are, in their own different ways, democratic communities. They're communities in which every child knows that their ideas and their actions influence the others involved in the community. So they're growing up in a setting where they feel responsible not just for themselves, but for the community within which they are developing. And that is an extraordinarily important aspect of education, and one which is almost completely ignored in our regular schools. Now, what I want you to notice is that none of these conditions exist in our standard schools, none of them. It's as if we deliberately take away from children everything that they need to educate themselves when we put them in school. And then we try very inefficiently and very ineffectively to educate them. So I'm going to conclude this way. I'm absolutely sure that someday people are going to look back at us now and they're going to say, what were those people thinking? Why on earth did they ever believe that coercion is essential for education? That's like believing you have to force people to eat or you have to force people to breathe. Why on earth did they ever think that standardization, such that people, regardless of their interests, regardless of their predilections, should all learn the same thing in the same way, be tested by the same tests? What kind of a crazy idea is that? I'm sure that we will reach the day where people will look back and say that. I hope we reach that day sooner rather than later. I would like to see it come in my lifetime. And I hope that some of you, maybe really all of you, I hope, will play a role in bringing that time about before too long. And with that, I thank you for your kind attention. I thank you for being here. And bless you all.
In many ways, humans are kind of evolutionary freaks. We're much more capable of learning skills than, let's say, our Australopithecus ancestors a few million years ago were. When I was 19, I bizarrely ended up getting an internship at a merchant bank. And in that bank, we had a manager. And he would pepper his talks with us with this kind of Darwinian language. Banking is a survival of the fittest, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there. Life is a continuous process of competition. The truth is, evolutionary history just isn't a constant competition. Actually, most animals spend as much time as they can relaxing, taking it easy, or playing and enjoying themselves. This idea that everything is continuously battling for energy is nonsense. I spent most of the last 25 years documenting hunter-gatherers as they took their worldview and tried to engage with our worldview in very uneven terms, and to try and make sense of their perceptions of work and our perceptions of work. And what it did was it revealed an entirely different way of thinking, an entirely different way of being. My name's James Sussman. I'm an anthropologist, and the title of my latest book is called Work: A Deep History from the Stone Age to the Age of Robots. When one thinks about hunter-gatherer society, they have imagined a world in which we endured this horrendous struggle for survival in an eat-or-be-eaten world. Nature was red in tooth and claw, and life was hard, and we learned to accumulate and grab resources. It was a great competition for life. But it seems fairly clear we enjoyed quite a lot of leisure time as hunter-gatherers. 20 years ago, I went off to the Kalahari to start working with a group of people called the Jinwasi. The Jinwasi were first hunter-gatherer society that were really studied to see how hard they actually worked, and it was revealed that they worked 15 hours in a week and had a very different work ethos to what we do here in the West. The idea of what constitutes work in the way we organize our lives can be very different and very contextual basis. Hunting, gathering, fishing, hiking. In the Zhenhua world, those are all considered work. In the Western world, where I come from at the moment, most of those things are considered leisure activities now. The Inuit in the Arctic, the Aboriginals in Australia, and there, of course, people like the Zhenhuasi engage with the land with consummate skill and consummate, in some ways, ease. The Kalahari Desert, where the Zhenhuasi live, is an incredibly tough environment. It's the kind of place where most of us, if we were dumped there without any prior knowledge of how to do things, we would be dead within several days. The Zhenhuasi, on the other hand, are able somehow out of this seemingly desolate place to pluck out 130 or so different plant species. They're able to hunt 15 or 20 animal species. They are so skilled and so attuned to that environment that they are able to do so on the basis of really a marginal amount of effort. Even in the toughest times of year, you're looking at not spending more than 4 or 5 hours a day on the food quest. And you're looking at the best times of year, people are able to simply pluck things. It's almost a bit like a magical kind of 7-Eleven. Now, of course, it sounds a little bit idyllic, and hunter-gatherers went through intensely difficult times, periods of climatic change, but for the most part, living off the land seemed a very straightforward way of making a living, and we are supremely adapted to making a living as hunters and gatherers. Hunter-gatherer societies, they're typically highly egalitarian. Richard Lee, an anthropologist who worked with the Zhenhuasi, he used the word fiercely egalitarian, and I haven't found a better way to describe it. There are no hierarchies whatsoever. Age does not convey any authority to anybody. Gender does not convey any authority to anybody. It's incredibly open and tolerant. People don't force things on children. But they also realize that there's an instinct, in particular, they say, not among women, but among men. Young men who go out hunting and they bring in their first big animal, they'll strut in and show off. They'll say that potentially risks upsetting the egalitarian balance that makes the society function. Rather than praise a successful hunter, they mock them. Somebody shows up if they've killed a giraffe, which is something huge and it's enough to feed everybody for ages and the meat's drying from the branches. They'll say, this giraffe, this bit of a scrawny giraffe and it stinks a little bit. And there's this great ritual of humility and insult that goes on. And the hunter will be expected to behave with great humility. And the way it was described by one man, he said, we use it to gentle young men's hearts. To enable leadership to be based purely on context and competence, voluntarily given and voluntarily accepted. Resources were shared openly and evenly and done through a system of demand sharing. In the system of demand sharing, it is in the right of pretty much anybody to go and ask anybody else for a share of what they have. And it is considered extremely rude to turn that person down under any circumstances. It stops any kind of authority. This enabled food and resources to flow very evenly and very quickly through society. The truth is now, very few zoologists, in fact no zoologist or ecologist, will think of an ecosystem as governed by competition. Instead, it will be governed by webs of intricate engagements, some of which are cooperative, some of which are less. This idea that nature is a constant competition for life is nonsense. Hunter-gatherers like the Zhenhuasi describe their environment as a kind of continuous flow of give and take between species and interactions. There's absolutely no denying that the extraordinary attitudes that evolved during the hunter-gatherer era have now brought us incredible benefits. We are both incredibly adaptable and culturally intransigent. When change is forced upon us, we're really good at adapting to it. We're amazingly good at doing it, but only when we have no choice. And I think what we might see is a restructuring and reorganization of our societies. Identities now which are far more hybridized. We certainly have a work identity through our Zoom channel. But for many people, I think there'll be an opportunity to re-engage themselves in the physical space that they are in. And I think it's going to profoundly reorganize the way we think about community, identity, belonging, and self. Economists say we're all universally this kind of selfish beast. Anthropologists, on the other hand, take the very starting point of their experience is based on generally going out and living somewhere where all your most fundamental and basic ideas about how the world works are often turned on their heads. It's a fundamental transition. It upsets your sense of the world. And anthropologists, I think, are based on having this double perspective of being in one world and from another, and then being able to look back in the world that they're from. And frankly, I think it would be good if we still lived in a world where people could experience another way of living and being to the point that it makes the strange familiar and the familiar strange.
Get smarter, faster with videos from the world's biggest thinkers.
Inside our bodies are chemicals that are trying to get us to do things that are in the best interest of us. They are endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. Endorphins. Endorphins are designed to do one thing and one thing only: mask physical pain. If you're a runner, if you've heard of a runner's high, what's happening is when that runner's out there pushing their bodies harder than they've ever pushed before, they feel good. And then an hour later, they're in pain for damage they caused their muscles an hour before. Endorphins, they're designed to mask physical pain. Dopamine. Dopamine is the feeling that you accomplish something you set out to accomplish. The whole purpose of dopamine is to make sure that we get stuff done. This is why you must write down your goals. There's a biological reason for that. We're very, very visually oriented animals. You have to be able to see the goal for it to biologically stay focused. And every time we achieve a goal that makes us feel like we're making progress to the vision we can see, we keep going and going and going until we achieve something remarkable. You have to be able to see it. Dopamine. Dopamine comes with a warning. Dopamine is highly, highly, highly addictive. Here are some other things that release dopamine: alcohol, nicotine, gambling, your cell phone. We can also get addicted to performance in our companies when all they do is give us numbers to hit, numbers to hit, numbers to hit, and a bonus you get, and a bonus you get, and a bonus you get. All they're doing is feeding us with dopamine, and we can't help ourselves. All we do is want more, more, more. One of the things we know about dopamine addict is they will do anything to get another hit, sometimes at the sacrifice of their own resources and their relationships. Dopamine is dangerous if it is unbalanced. Serotonin is responsible for feelings of pride and status. This is why public recognition is very important. We are social animals and we need the recognition of others. This is why we have commencement for graduation. You could get an email that says, "Congratulations, you fulfilled all the requirements for graduation. Enclosed, please print out the PDF of your diploma." Wouldn't feel so good, right? So instead, we have a big ceremony to recognize the accomplishment. And in the audience, we put our family and our friends and our teachers, all of those in our tribe who've supported us and watched our backs as we've made it through. And then we show up on that day and we go up on that stage and we take our diploma. It feels great. We feel our status rise. We feel our pride go up. And here's the best part about serotonin. At the exact moment that you took your diploma and you felt that surge of serotonin go through your body, your parents sitting in the audience also got a surge of serotonin and also felt an intense pride watching you graduate. And this is what serotonin is trying to do. It is trying to reinforce the relationship between parent and child, coach and player, the caregiver and the one who is grateful for the support they are given. The problem is you can trick serotonin. We live in a materialist society, so we judge status very often in our country based on how much money you make. So any conspicuous display of wealth raises your status. This is why they put the logos on the outside. No good on the inside, nobody can see them. You can actually feel your confidence rise when you put on the stuff. because it's showing this display of status. It feels great. The problem is there was no real relationship that was reinforced because of it. You tricked the system. That's why we keep trying to accomplish things and accumulate more and more material goods, and yet we never feel successful because there was no relationship. We tricked it. We gamed it. Oxytocin. This is the best chemical of all. Oxytocin is the feeling of love, trust, and friendship. Oxytocin is that intense feeling of safety that someone's got your back. There are multiple ways you can get oxytocin. One way to get it is physical contact. Hugging feels wonderful. When women give birth to children, huge surge of oxytocin in their body. This is what's responsible for the mother-child bond. It's all that oxytocin in the system. Another way you can get oxytocin is through acts of human generosity. Doing nice things for people. Remember, our bodies are trying to get us to repeat behaviors that are in our best interest, and it's making us feel good when we see or do acts of human generosity so that we will do them. In fact, the more oxytocin you have in your body, the more generous you actually become. It gets better than that. Lots of oxytocin in your body inhibits addiction. It boosts your immune system. It makes you healthier. That's why happy people live longer. It's why couples live longer. It increases our ability to solve problems. It increases our creativity. It's really good for us, and it's not addictive. It just feels great. There's one more chemical I haven't told you about. Cortisol. Cortisol is the feeling of stress and the feeling of anxiety. We share these chemicals with all the social mammals. Cortisol is designed to keep us alive. It is the first stage of fight or flight. It makes us paranoid. It makes all of our senses hyper-attuned to look for danger. It injects glucose into our muscles to make us stiff and ready to go in case we need to fight or flight. It increases our heart rate like crazy. Cortisol, to get all of that extra energy, it needs to shut down non-essential systems. So it shuts off things like growth. You don't need your fingernails to grow at that moment. It shuts it off. The other thing it shuts off is our immune system. Don't need it in that moment. The problem is you're not supposed to have cortisol in your system all the time. You're supposed to have it in and then gone. One of the things cortisol does, it inhibits the release of oxytocin. Biologically, if you work in a high-stress environment where you don't feel safe, you are biologically less empathetic and less generous. Alcoholics Anonymous has been highly effective for decades. Alcoholics Anonymous knows that if you master all 11 steps, but not the 12th, you will drink again. The 12th step is the commitment to help another alcoholic. Service. Service to another. Oxytocin wins. Serotonin wins. The more we look after each other, the safer we feel, the more we feel like we belong, and the more we will work together to confront the dangers outside.
What I want to do in the little time we have tonight is to share with you something, an idea, some knowledge that has been the most important thing in my entire life. And an idea that has me totally frustrated and incredibly optimistic at the same time about the future. So to get started, what I would like to do is to This is going to be a short presentation. Don't get scared. But let's start out with the last 2 million years. And what I've done to make that a little easier to grasp in the time we have is to condense that 2 million years into 1 calendar year, just to give us some perspective about where we're going. So we're going to take that 2 million years and look at it as 1 calendar year. And I'll start at the beginning. About 2 million years ago, give or take a million, the first humans took steps, became bipedal, started to move around in a different way, and began the human journey. January 1, the Stone Age. We spent quite a bit of time hunting and gathering, and it was not until November the 19th that we discovered fire that we could control, heat our homes, cook our food, protect us from predators. But by December the 29th, agriculture had been invented, and all of a sudden cities emerged and people living together and sharing and collaborating. That was a very incredible invention of people, agriculture, on December 29th of that calendar year. On December the 31st was Rome, Greece, the advent of the idea of science, of replicatable knowledge, that somebody could investigate something that nature did, understand it, and then take that knowledge and put it to human use. Big idea, because we at that point could move to 1105. Because now people started to gather together and apply those ideas in a mass way. And they could replicate the results of these ideas. And a very important part of the science idea itself is to find something and then be able to repeat it in a very predictable way. That was critical. And of course, we had to, since we're building a lot of these factories, we had to build factories for human beings too, called schools. So we could manufacture people that could work well in the factories. And that was an extraordinary and important idea, because starting at 1105, in the last few minutes, all hell broke loose. And we have moved in such a fantastic way during that period. In those last few minutes, think about just 100 years ago, most people living in America lived in poverty. Very few people had indoor plumbing. Very few people had electricity. In the last 100 years, in the last few minutes of that calendar year, it's incredible what has happened during this period. And that has produced so much progress that we have now turned success into failure. Now that knowledge has spread itself all over the world, and people are pushing up against each other a little bit, in the sense that a third world country can do just as well producing something as we can. And that produces a problem. And we're now facing a period in history where no institution is not facing profound, turbulent, unpredictable change. And that's everywhere in the world. So what do we do? Because we have all these old answers, but they don't seem to be working the way they used to. Well, a few years ago, about 60 of the leaders in industry in America got together and started a study to say, okay, with this new kind of world that we have, with the internet, with all the satellite communication, with telephony, there are many more telephones in the world than there are people at this point. What does America do? And I won't try to go through the whole study, but the result was, they said, there's only one possibility for us to succeed as Americans, to be competitive, and that is to innovate, and to innovate continuously. And that's really what I want to share, because we have been looking at what it is that's behind that process of innovation, creative thinking, what we can do with our brains, what is that, the possibilities of that resource that we all have in these heads of ours. The thing that changed everything for us in trying to understand creativity is that somebody from NASA came to us, the deputy director, and said, look, we have a lot of people working for us. We need some way to select the people that are the most creative so they can go on the teams that are facing the toughest problems. Can you give us some kind of an instrument, a test or something that we can give to find those people? We didn't have such a thing, but we developed it, we applied it, and it was very predictive. It worked really well. But the idea emerged that, gee, we still don't know where creativity comes from. Is it that some people are born with it and others not? Or is it learned? Does it come from our experience in life? And the idea came up, this test is so simple. Why don't we give it to some children and see how they do? So we did. We created a sample of the American population with 1,600 children and started it out when they were about 5 years old. Now, here's a question I want to ask you. This is a test for the ability to look at a problem and come up with new, different, and innovative ideas. What percentage of those 5-year-olds fell into what you might call the genius category of imagination? 80, 90, wow. This is a great audience. There are some audiences that don't guess quite that high. 98%. We were pretty shocked. Some people like you would probably not be shocked. I suspect you've been 5-year-olds, so there you are. But, the information was so astonishing, we decided to turn that into a longitudinal study, go back 5 years later and see how they're doing it. So we went back, they're now 10. What would you guess? Somebody came on very close. 30%. We decided to extend it for 5 more years. They're now 15. Well, we have some pessimists out there. It was all the way up to 12. So you can see something of a trend here, right? That study ended because so many people got depressed. Most of the testing was done by teachers, and they just didn't want to do it again. But we have tested a lot of adults. And what would you guess? You're close. 2%. Now, the great historian Oswald Spengler once said, in all of his years of studying history, he had concluded it only takes 2% of a population to create the basic ideas and that everybody else applies them. And it turned out, gee, he was pretty close to right. Look, folks, if we're going to enter the future with hope, that's not going to work. We have to do something about it. And what we found with those children was the thing that I want to try to share with you and hope that you walk out of here tonight knowing why that happened and what you can do about it, because you have the possibility of being in that 98% tomorrow. And I'm serious about that. What we found from the studies with children and from looking at the way brains work, that we can actually do that. There are 2 kinds of thinking that occur in the brain, and they use different parts of the brain, and it's a totally different paradigm in the sense of how we form something in our minds. One is called divergent, that's imagination. That's generating new possibilities, and the other is called convergent, and that's where you're making a judgment, you're making a decision, you're testing something, you're criticizing, you're evaluating. So one is like an accelerator, and the other one is like the brake. We found that what happens to these children as we educate them is we teach them to do both kinds of thinking at the same time. So when somebody asks you to come up with new ideas, as you come up with them, what we've mostly learned in school is to start looking at them immediately and trying to say, oh, well, you can hear the stuff that goes on. We've done that before, we've never done that, that's crazy, that'll cost too much, all of that. When you actually look at what's happening inside the brain, you find that neurons are fighting each other and actually diminishing the power of the brain because we're constantly judging, criticizing, etc. This is not going to work, folks. You need to find the 5-year-old, and you can. That capability never goes away. That part of the brain that produces this wonderful imagination is something you exercise every day when you're dreaming. So the great designer said, I'm going to put that mechanism so they exercise it every day in case they ever need an idea. You've got that capability, absolutely. And you'll move from the normal brain, which is that colored area shows normal thinking, to a brain that is very active everywhere, particularly in the front. So it gets worse, because if we're operating under fear, we're using even a smaller part of the brain. And as we begin to use logic, we use more, but we begin to use creative thinking and the brain lights up. It's just extraordinary what happens. And nature does this as well, we found. That evolution works that way, producing many alternatives, then through natural selection, selecting the best ones. But it's always creating a lot of possibilities before it starts selecting. So the question we face for the future is, are we going to be in a culture that depends on right answers, that are repeatable, that are always predictable? Or are we going to have a culture where whatever it is we're thinking about, a new recipe or a spaceship, are there many possibilities? Can we create a new future that solves the new problems that we have never seen before? So Einstein was right, and your issue is to go beyond the first step that we took and take the first leap and turn your 5-year-old on to tap into that imagination that every one of you has that can make the future extraordinarily brighter for everybody. Tomorrow, do an exercise. Pick up a table fork, turn your 5-year-old on, and come up with 25 or 30 ideas on how to improve. Let that 5-year-old figure out ideas on how to improve that table fork. You can begin that exercise, and like anything else, you can start exercising that part of the brain and turn yourself into a great innovator of the wonderful future we can have if we start doing this. Thank you.